The legacy of World War II. So the economic impact. Even during wartime, American output steadily grew as the physical damage done to the country was only limited to Hawaii and some overseas bases. But many countries in Europe suffered extensive damage to buildings and infrastructure, so the end of the war was a time for rebuilding. However, the end of the war also marked the beginning of a period of expansive growth for Europe and other nations. For the second half of the 20th century, the United States, Europe, and Japan experienced amazing gains. In fact, America used its footing post-war to become a global superpower. So how did this happen? This happened since the years between World War I and World War II were rife with global economic instability. Europe had not had time to implement many of the advancements by the United States and elsewhere, and where Americans were developing new technologies and making important advancements in areas like automotive industry, and many Europeans were still heating their homes with coal. However, once the war ended, all these technologies and advancements in business and industry became available. People who worked in wartime as soldiers and nurses also needed new jobs, and American advancement during the preceding years provided the perfect blueprint for how to use this newly available workforce. Computers, the military impact of World War II. Computers had been developed well before the start of World War II. However, the war demanded rapid progression of such technology, resulting in production of new computers. One such example was the first computer, the electronic numerical integrator and computer, in short, the ENIAC, one of the first general-purpose computers. It is capable of performing thousands of calculations in a second and was initially designed for military purposes. But the government released ENIAC to the public in the early 1946, presenting the computer as a tool that revolutionized the field of mathematics. Second is the atomic bomb, the weapon that won World War II. Atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August of 1945. The two bombs killed an estimated 200,000 people, many immediately, but thousands of more later on due to radiation. Work on the bombs began in the US in 1939 under the name the Manhattan Project. The project was so secretive that President Harry Truman didn't even know of its existence until he took office in 1945. Jet engines came to the force in the close. A third is the jet engines, and they came into the force in the closing months of World War II as a way of giving fighters an advantage over their enemies. The German Me-262 was the first operational jet fighter, with the British Gloucester Meteor not far behind. This technology was first developed between 1939 and 1945 and is now being used by airlines to carry passengers all over the globe. Uh, how did World War II reshape the world's structure and power balance? After World War II, a new conflict arose. Known as the Cold War, this battle pitted the world's two great powers, the democratic United States and the communist Soviet Union, against each other. Beginning in the late 1950s, space would become another dramatic arena for this competition, as each side sought to prove the superiority of its technology, its military firepower, and its political economic system. Space exploration. On October 4th, 1957, a Soviet R-7 intercontinental ballistic missile launched Sputnik, Russian for traveler, the world's first artificial satellite and the first man-made object to be placed in the Earth's orbit. Sputnik's launch came as a surprise and not a pleasant one to most Americans. In addition, this demonstration of the overwhelming power of the R-7 missile, seemingly capable of delivering a nuclear warhead into U.S. airspace, made gathering intelligence and Soviet Union military activities particularly urgent. In 1958, the U.S. launched its own satellite, Explorer-1, designed by the U.S. Army under the direction of rocket scientist Werner von Braun. That same year, President Dwight D. Eisenhower signed a public order creating the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, NASA for short, a federal agency dedicated to space exploration. By landing on the moon, the U.S. effectively won the space race that had begun with Sputnik's launch in 1957. And finally, on December 25th, 1991, the Soviet flag flew over the Kremlin in Moscow for the last time. Representatives from Soviet republics, Ukraine, Georgia, Belarus, Armenia, Azerbaijan, Kyrgyzstan, Kyrgyzstan, Moldova, Turkmenistan, Tajikistan, and Uzbekistan had already announced that they no longer be part of the Soviet Union. Instead, they declared they would establish a Commonwealth of independent states. Because the three Baltic republics, Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia, had already declared their independence from the USSR, only one of its 15 republics remained, and there was the fall of the Soviet Union. Why did World War II reshape uh, new international organizations formed in globalization? Although many organizations were created after World War II, the three most important were the United Nations, the International Monetary Fund, and the World Bank. The International Monetary Fund, or IMF for short, and the World Bank were created at the Bretton Woods Conference of 1944. The IMF was meant to pull money from various countries to be lent out to countries that needed loans so as to be able to meet short-term commitments. The World Bank was meant to provide countries with loans to help them with projects for economic development. The idea behind these were to create systems that would help all countries develop. The most famous organization created after World War II was the United Nations. This was a successor to the League of Nations. Its main function was to do various things that would help to ensure peace and prevent another world war from erupting in the future. This international system was set up to ensure peace and prosperity in the post-war world. How is World War II still affecting us? World War II is still affecting our everyday lives. Germany and Japan still have restrictions upon their size of military. The nuclear bombs at the end of the war scared the nuclear states enough to prevent an all-out communism and capitalism World War III. Japan, Italy, and Germany are now all democracies. And the end of World War II started the Cold War, which saw the rise of nuclear weapon stockpiles and arms races, which still impacts the economy. Finally, in our everyday lives, we use computers, which were invented during World War II. The end.